Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're diving into one of the most misunderstood but rewarding parts of the entire elk season. That's glassing October bulls in transition zones. By this point in the season, the rut has burned out. The noise, chaos, and excitement of September are gone or fading. The woods are getting quiet. Bulls that once screamed across drainages now slip through the timber like ghosts. Most hunters pack it in or move on to deer season, assuming the elk have vanished, but they haven't. They've simply changed priorities, right? And if you understand where they go and how to glass them effectively, this period can produce some of your best opportunities of the year. October bulls live differently than they did just a few weeks ago. They've worn down from the rut, they're cautious from pressure and laser focused on recovery. They spend their days tucked into small, overlooked pockets of security, places that offer feed, water, shade, and isolation all within a short walk. These areas, the in-between zones where bedding and feeding overlap, are what I call transition zones, and they're where most bulls ride out the post-rut lull. Glassing in this environment takes patience, precision, and a totally different rhythm than what worked in September. You're not chasing sound anymore. You're hunting silence. Every move, every setup, and every angle matters. The bulls aren't giving themselves away. You have to earn the right to see them. In this episode, we'll break down exactly how to do that. We're going to start by understanding what defines a transition zone and why it becomes the nucleus of post-rut movement. We're going to dig into how bulls use these areas daily, where to position yourself for the best glassing advantage, and how to read subtle terrain clues that reveal where they're hiding. Finally, we're going to talk about the patience and timing that separate successful glassers from the ones who just cover country and hope for luck. If you've ever glassed an entire ridge system in October and thought there's no way elk are still here, this episode is for you because odds are they were. You just weren't looking in the right places or with the right mindset. So let's get into it. If you want to consistently glass up bulls in October, you first have to understand what they're actually doing. And that starts with recognizing the zones they live in. By this point in the season, bulls aren't roaming across vast drainages or chasing herds of cows. They're recovering, they're recalibrating and tightening their home range to areas that meet one purpose: survival with efficiency. That's where transition zones come into play. These are the mid-elevation corridors between summer and winter ranges, between open feeding areas and dense bedding cover, between high ridges and low valleys. They're not as exposed as open slopes, but not as dark and secluded as deep timber. They're that middle ground, a mix of everything elk need in October. Transition zone usually offers three things in close proximity: security, food, and thermals that behave predictably. Bulls are worn thin from the rut, often bruised, sore, and underweight. They're not looking to cover miles anymore. They're looking for small, contained pockets that allow them to feed without traveling far or exposing themselves. These zones often sit on the edges of cover, a bench with mixed aspen and grass, or a small meadow tucked below a north slope, or the transition band where tall timber gives way to scattered pine and sage. Elevation-wise, most transition zones fall right in that mid-band, roughly 7,500 to 9,000 feet in a lot of western country. This is where bulls drop to find better feed and, gentler thermals after leaving the high basins, but before committing to their full-on winter ranges. The exact elevation shifts with local snow levels and pressure, but the concept's going to stay the same. These are the stepping stones between the extremes. What makes these areas so productive is that they give elk options. A bull can feed early or late, depending on temperature. He can bed just inside cover if it's warm, or deeper in the timber if the wind's harsh. He can shift slopes with minimal exposure, moving with thermals rather than against them. Everything about these spots screams efficiency, and efficiency is what tired post-rut bulls crave. One of the easiest ways to locate transition zones on a map is to look for edges, not sharp terrain features, but gradual shifts in vegetation and slope aspect. South-facing slopes with faded green feed that border north-facing timber are prime examples. Elk like that balance. They can step out to feed in sunlight when it's cold, then slide 100 yards back into shade once it warms. That constant access to comfort is what keeps them there day after day, even when pressure moves through nearby drainages. The other giveaway of a good transition zone is the presence of diversity. Monotone country, endless timber, or wide open sage doesn't hold elk well this time of year. You're looking for contrast, scattered openings, mixed tree species, drainages that pinch down before flaring open again. Those varied landscapes create bedding, feeding, and travel routes all in one tight pocket. Another subtle but critical factor is wind consistency. October can bring erratic thermals, especially as weather fronts move in and out. Bulls choose areas where air currents are more stable, mid-slope benches, protected fingers, or spots that aren't directly exposed to heavy afternoon heating. If you can find places where the wind stays relatively predictable throughout the day, you've likely found a zone elk will stick to even as the rest of the country shifts with changing conditions. The best way to think about transition zones is as October sanctuaries. They're the places bulls slip into when they're done performing for the rut and ready to survive the long haul. They're not big and they're rarely obvious, but once you know how to read the terrain, they start to jump off the map. When you can identify and glass these areas with intent instead of randomly covering ridges or drainages, your odds are going to skyrocket. You're not just looking for elk anymore. You're looking for the kind of country elk choose when survival becomes their only priority. Once you understand what a transition zone is, the next step is learning how bulls actually use it, because this is where October behavior becomes completely different from September. The same bulls that were bugling from ridge to ridge just a few weeks ago are now ghosts. They're quiet, they're deliberate, and they're obsessed with survival. You can't hunt them the way you did during the rut because their entire priority system is shifted. After the rut, bulls are worn down, physically and mentally. They've lost a significant amount of body weight, often 20 to 30%, and many carry injuries from fighting. Their focus turns entirely toward recovery. Food and safety are all that matter now, and every move they make revolves around balancing those two things. That's why most bulls in October aren't traveling far. They shrink their home range dramatically, sometimes down to just a few hundred acres. They'll bed, feed, and water within tight loops, often using the same ridge system or drainage day after day as long as they remain undisturbed. The less they move, the safer they're going to feel. During this time, feeding patterns change too. In September, bulls often fed late at night and early in the morning, driven by competition and energy demands. But in October, their feeding windows widen. They'll often rise earlier in the evening or feed later into the morning, especially on cooler days or before approaching weather. You'll also notice more midday movement. Not full-on travel, but short feeding bouts near bedding cover as they rebuild strength. These are the subtle movements that glassers can catch, right? A flick of an ear, a head turning in filtered light, while a lot of hunters are already miles away trying to cover country. Bulls also become more selective with terrain. They favor north and northeast facing slopes for bedding where shade and cool air help them conserve energy. But they'll feed closer to south and southeast aspects, especially where residual green feed lingers. The magic happens right between those two, where feed and cover meet. That overlap is what defines the best transition zones. You'll also see bulls begin to separate again. In early October, a few may still hang near the cows, but by mid-month, a lot of those bulls have peeled off completely. Mature bulls seek solitude or join loose bachelor pairs for protection. They don't want to be around cows anymore. That's extra movement, extra scent, and extra vulnerability. When you glass a lone bull bedded on a shaded bench, that's classic October behavior. Wind and thermals influence their positioning more than a lot of folks realize as well. Bulls use consistent airflow as a defensive tool. They'll bed on benches where they can feel the wind in their face and thermals at their back. That dual current gives them warning from multiple directions. One of the main reasons they're so tough to stalk this time of year. You're going to rarely find an October bull in a place where air is swirling. They avoid unpredictability at all costs. Another key piece of behavior is micro-movement. Bulls don't make dramatic relocations in October, but they constantly adjust within their zone. They may bed 200 yards lower when the sun hits hard or move slightly upslope when the air cools. They'll shift from one pocket of timber to another depending on wind stability. If you're glassing and suddenly lose a bull you were watching, odds are he didn't leave the drainage, he just slipped into a new pocket nearby. And finally, October bulls rely heavily on routine. Once they settle into a safe pattern, they'll repeat it with remarkable consistency. That's why finding one in October is often a matter of patience, not luck. If you spot a bull one evening, be back there the next morning. If you find fresh sign on a particular slope, stay on it. The predictability of post-rut bulls is their biggest weakness, but only if you have the discipline to stick with it. When you start glassing with this behavioral understanding, you're going to stop wasting a lot of time in random country, and you're going to start connecting patterns, slope aspect, feed, shade, and wind. Every bull you glass is going to teach you something new about how they manage October. And once you know how they think, it's not just about finding elk anymore, it's about anticipating where they're going to be next. When it comes to glassing October bulls in transition zones, your position is everything. You can have the best optics in the world, but if you're not sitting in the right place, you're never going to see the elk that are right below you. This time of year, the key isn't to cover miles, it's to cover angles. Every ridge, every finger, and every bench offers a different slice of country, and your goal is to find the ones that give you the most visibility with the least disturbance. The first rule is simple. Get above the zone, not in it. October bulls are cautious. They've been pressured for weeks, and if you move into their level, you're going to blow them out before you ever know they were there. Glassing from above allows you to stay out of their scent cone, manage unpredictable thermals, and observe without impacting their behavior. Most of the time, you should be glassing from side ridges, benches just below the skyline, or secondary knobs that give you cross-angle views into the country you're watching. A productive glassing position checks 3 boxes: coverage, concealment, and control. Coverage means you can see a mix of terrain types, feeding edges, shaded bedding slopes, and the transition areas between them without constantly moving your setup. The more variety you can observe from one position, the more efficient your glassing becomes. Concealment means you're not skylined or silhouetted. You don't need to be at the highest point on the ridge. In fact, that's often the worst place to glass from. Set up just below the crest using brush, rocks, or broken timber to break up your outline. You've got to remember October bulls are scanning constantly from their beds or from their feeding area. Even the faint glint of movement on a skyline can send them slipping into thicker cover where you're never going to see them again. Control means managing your wind and thermals, right? Keeping in mind that early in the morning, right after first light, those thermals are still traveling downhill in the shade until the sun starts to warm the slope, and then it's going to be rising the rest of the day as long as the sun stays on that slope, right? In the evening, when the shadows start to creep in on that hillside, the thermals are going to switch and they're going to be going back downhill again. So you got to make sure that you set up your glassing accordingly if you're going to be glassing anything below you on the close side. Now let's talk about angles and timing. The best glassing positions give you visibility into multiple aspects. Early in the day, you want to focus on east and southeast facing slopes where elk feed after sunrise. As the light grows, shift your focus towards the north and northeast aspects where they're going to bed. In the evening, reverse that. The biggest mistake a lot of hunters make is sitting in one glassing position too long after the light has shifted. If the sun's angle has changed, your viewing angle should probably also. Another overlooked factor is comfort. October glassing is slow and deliberate. You might sit for hours before spotting even a flicker of movement. If you're cold, cramped, or exposed to glare, you're never going to last long enough to catch those subtle clues that reveal where a bull is bedded. So make sure that you're bringing the comfort items. It might be a small pad, find shade or wind protection, and settle in. The longer you can glass effectively, the higher your odds of success. You also want to pick glassing spots that let you watch more than just one drainage or ridge system at once, if possible. Look for benches or knobs with overlapping views, country that opens into multiple angles of visibility rather than a single slope. This allows you to observe different elevations simultaneously and pick up movement as bulls transition from one side of the ridge to another. When you're scouting on maps or during e-scouting, identify potential vantage points the same way you'd identify a shooting lane. Look for open knobs with steep drop-offs on one side or two sides, or saddle areas that overlook multiple drainages. Mark those, then refine them in person to see what offers the best line of sight into transition country. And finally, move less and watch more. October glassing success isn't about covering endless terrain. It's about reading what you can't immediately see. Sometimes the bull you're after is 600 yards below you, bedded in a shadow you'd never notice unless the light changes or he gets up and moves. That's why patience trumps pace. Every successful October glassing setup is built on one principle: observation before action. The hunters who understand that aren't just looking at country, they're studying it. They're learning how elk use every slope, every shade pocket, and every contour line. And when that moment comes, when a bull finally stands to stretch or feed, you're already going to be in position, already in control, and already ready. If there's one skill that separates average glassers from consistently successful ones in October, it's timing. The light, the thermals, and the elk's rhythm all change together, right? And when you learn to line those three up, you're going to stop wasting a lot of time staring at empty slopes and start catching movement others miss. October bulls are creatures of efficiency. They move when the light is forgiving, the air is stable, and the temperature is comfortable. And that means that your glassing schedule has to sync with theirs. You're not glassing for visibility, you're glassing for behavior. And that distinction is everything. The early morning is your best window to catch bulls on their feet. Before the sun hits the ridges, cold air is sinking, and thermals are pulling the scent downhill. This is perfect because bulls are typically feeding their way back toward cover. So you got to focus your glass on the east and southeast slopes first. Those are the ones that light up earliest and hold feed with just enough warmth to draw bulls out. As the sun climbs and thermals start to rise, elk movement begins to slow. You're going to catch a bull slipping into timber just before the light fully floods a slope. Those last 20 minutes of the transition are golden. Watch shade lines like a hawk. The moment sunlight hits their flank, a lot of bulls are going to shift to a shaded pocket or slide into the first available timber patch. If you're glassing from the right angle, that's your opportunity window. The small slice of time when they're exposed and vulnerable to observation. By late morning, the light is high. Thermals are on their way up, might be getting windier and causing swirling wind, and it's easy to think that the hunt is over. But that's when a lot of hunters pack it up mistakenly. But the best glassers know midday is often about the micro movement. Bulls don't travel far in the heat, but they reposition constantly within their zone. They're going to adjust for wind, for shade, and temperature. If you've glassed up a bull's general area in the morning, stick with it. Get comfortable and watch the edges of shade pockets and small openings near bedding timber. Every hour or so, a bull might stand to stretch or rebed or feed briefly. And that's the moment you're going to spot him. Not charging across a hillside, but turning his head or shifting positions in the shadows. The midday period also gives you a chance to study thermals. Watch how they behave in each drainage. See where the wind holds steady and where it swirls. This is the kind of information that pays off when you need to make a play later that evening or plan your setup for the next morning. Evening is when transition zones come alive again. As the light softens and the air cools, thermals begin sinking and bulls feel safer stepping out. Your goal in the evening isn't necessarily to glass far ridges, right? Because you can't get there in time. It's to glass into them. Focus your optics deep into shaded slopes and pockets that are now cooling faster than the rest of the mountain. Areas that you can reach, right? The most productive window of the entire evening is often the final 45 minutes before dark. Bulls are going to typically rise from their beds just as the temperature drops enough for them to move comfortably. So watch benches that connect bedding to feeding terrain, those subtle ramps and saddles that offer both cover and easy travel. If you're glassing from the right angle, you're going to start to pick up soft, low light reflections, the tan of a rump, the swing of an antler. Don't pull your glass too soon. Some bulls won't show themselves until the light is nearly gone. This is when the best glassers earn their keep. The October sun sits lower in the sky, and that also changes how you see and what you can see. Midday glare can blind you if you're facing west, but it can also highlight movement if you're glassing eastward into shaded country. Always position yourself so the sun is behind or beside you whenever possible. That angle flattens shadows and makes elk stand out more clearly. You've also got to keep in mind that light direction also affects elk visibility. Bulls with slick, dark coats after the rut absorb light differently. They don't stand out like they did in velvet early fall. Instead, you're going to pick up small flashes of tan or shadow shifts, not necessarily full-bodied shapes. It's subtle, and the best glassers train their eyes to catch it. And finally, remember this: timing and thermals are inseparable. You can't glass effectively if your scent is blowing into the country you're watching. Morning thermals early in the day are falling. As the sun heats up, you're going to have those rising thermals and switching thermals until evening when they start dropping down again. Plan your glassing moves with that in mind, and you'll never wonder why elk keep disappearing from the places you just saw them. When you match your glassing rhythm to the bull's rhythm and let the light and wind guide your schedule, everything slows down. The mountains start to make sense again, and you stop hunting randomly and start seeing with purpose. One of the biggest differences between hunters who find elk in October and those who don't is the way they look at terrain. Average hunters see a mountain. Experienced glassers see a map. Every ridge, every finger, every pocket of shadow is going to tell a story if you know how to read it. When bulls shift into transition zones, their world shrinks, but their habits become structured. They choose areas that allow them to feed, bed, and stay safe without moving much. If you learn to interpret the landscape through that lens, you can almost predict where they're going to appear before they do. Start by identifying edges. Elk live on contrast. The best October glassing happens when one habitat type meets another. The edge where open grass fades into broken timber, or where aspen groves give way to dark north slopes. Those seams create visibility, feed diversity, and escape cover all in one line. Mature bulls love them because they can step out to feed for a few minutes and slip back into shade without exposure. Next, look for micro features, your benches, shelves, and saddles that connect drainages. On a map, they look subtle, but on a mountain, they're movement magnets. Bulls use those features to travel between feeding and bedding zones without climbing unnecessary elevation or crossing exposed ridges. From a glassing standpoint, those areas are gold because they concentrate movement within visible terrain. Drainage structure is another critical clue. In October, elk aren't bedding deep in the bottoms or on top of ridges a lot of times. They tend to favor mid-elevation fingers that catch morning shade and afternoon stability. If you study the way drainages branch out, you can often spot the spine of travel that links their feeding benches to bedding cover. Focus your glass on those midpoints, especially where a north-facing draw meets an open slope or sparse timber. Then there's aspect and exposure. South-facing slopes are solar panels. They warm first and they green up longer, making them prime feeding grounds in early and mid-October. But as temperatures drop, bulls are going to gradually rotate to east or southeast aspects to catch the first light of the morning while avoiding the harsh afternoon heat. The shift is subtle, but it's consistent. If you're glassing the same ridge system throughout October, follow that rotation with your optics. Another key is understanding how elk use topography for wind management. Bulls rarely bed on flat ground. Instead, they want to rise behind them and a fall in front, a setup that lets them see and smell danger from both directions. On a topo map, this looks like a slight finger ridge or a convex bench, right? Just below a steeper incline. These are perfect bedding zones because they create natural wind funnels. Now combine all these features. Imagine a shaded north slope with a small bench, 150 yards above a meadow with regrowth feed, connected by a gentle saddle. That's your transition zone. And if it's unpressured, odds are a bull has already found it. When you're glassing, train yourself to think in layers, not just surfaces. Don't just scan the obvious openings. Start with the near slope, then the far slope, then the transition line in between. Scan vertically as well as horizontally, bottom to top, top to bottom. Bulls love to bed halfway up slopes where they can watch below and catch consistent thermals. The more disciplined your scanning pattern, the fewer bulls you're going to miss. Light also plays a role in reading the terrain here. In the morning, glass the shaded faces because elk are still exposed as they return to cover. In the evening, glass into the shadows again, but from a different angle. Each time of day reveals different terrain details. A bench you couldn't see at noon might suddenly pop into view when the light flattens at sunset. Another detail experienced glassers pay attention to is texture. On the long slopes, elk create subtle patterns. Faint trails, churned up soil, rubbed saplings, or slightly discolored grass patches from bedding. From a distance, they look like inconsistencies in the landscape. That's your roadmap. A well-used bedding area often looks softer from afar, a small patch of uniform color breaking up the slope's natural texture. Once you train your eyes to catch those deviations, you're going to start picking up elk you never saw before. And the final piece here is patience. Reading the landscape is about letting the terrain tell you where the elk are, not forcing your expectations onto it. Every drainage, every ridge, every transition zone has a pattern. If you slow down, analyze it, and let your glass do the work, those patterns become more obvious. The best glassers don't just look, they interpret. They see the terrain like a bull sees it. Where's the safest bed? Where's the best feed? Where does the wind stay consistent? And where can I see danger first? Once you start thinking like that, every mountain starts speaking the same language. When you're glassing October bulls in transition zones, success isn't about how many miles you cover. It's about how long you're willing to sit still and truly study the mountain. The post-rut period rewards hunters who can slow their pace, control their focus, and let time do the work. By October, elk aren't moving a whole lot. Their daily routines are small and consistent. They live in short loops, a few hundred yards between bedding, feeding, and resting. Because of that, you don't need to glass 20 drainages a day. You need to glass one really well, and that means patience. Every drainage has its own rhythm. In one basin, elk might feed until 8:30 a.m. In another, they might vanish by first light. Learn to time those windows through observation. If you spot elk on a particular slope in the morning, note exactly when they move. If you find fresh sign but no elk, be there earlier or stay later in the day. Consistency comes from building a log of patterns here, not just where you saw elk, but when. Morning and evening remain your anchor points, but don't discount the midday hours. Some of the best bulls I've glassed in October stood up between 11 and 2 to reposition, stretch, or feed briefly. It's not dramatic movement, but if you're in position, you can catch it. You'll see an ear, you'll see a head, you'll see a tine flash, or a body start shifting positions, right? Those are all clues that only appear to hunters who were patient enough to wait. And patience isn't just about time, it's about control. A lot of hunters glass too fast. They swing their optics across the slope. They're in search of movement in a crowded field. But the best glassers do the opposite. They slow down until they're scanning the mountain in inches, not yards, just like you were approaching a stalk. Pick a zone, maybe a north-facing slope or a bench above a meadow, and dissect it. Scan from left to right, top to bottom. Then do it again in reverse. Change magnification, change angles, and take short breaks to reset your eyes. Sometimes you're going to look at the same patch for 30 minutes before the scene changes. That's when a bull will finally reveal himself. Stillness also applies to your body. Movement kills glassing, so adjust your setup so you can sit comfortably without having to constantly shift. Keep your optics stable, elbows supported, and breathing calm. The more motionless you are, the more the mountain is going to reveal to you. When you spend enough time watching the same country, patterns are going to start to emerge. Maybe you notice a group of cows feeding in the same opening each evening, or a bull slipping out of cover along the same shaded edge every few days. These are clues, and the best hunters are going to connect them. Pattern recognition turns random sightings into predictable opportunities. Once you know a bull's loop, even roughly, you can anticipate where and when he's going to show up again. And if you're patient enough to let him make the first move, he'll give you all the information you need. This is also when it pays to track environmental changes. A small temperature drop, a storm front, or a wind shift can alter patterns overnight. Don't get frustrated when that happens. Adapt to it. Bulls will still use the same structure of country. They'll just pivot within it. Reading those adjustments keeps you one step ahead. Patience here doesn't mean staying put forever either. The trick is knowing when to change vantage points and when to hold. If you've glassed a drainage for multiple days with no fresh sign, it's probably time to reposition. But if you've seen even subtle activity, commit longer. The first day, you're learning terrain. The second, you're confirming patterns. The third, you're executing. The best hunters aren't reactive, they're methodical. They don't chase every bugle or rumor of elk movement. They sit, they observe, and they strike when the timing feels right. October rewards that kind of composure. When you slow down and let the mountain reveal its rhythm, you start to see elk where others see nothing. You begin to recognize the tiny flickers of movement, the habitual paths, and the soft recurring patterns that tell you exactly when a bull will appear. Patience isn't just a skill you're born with. It's one that you have to build with glassing. And in October, it's the sharpest tool you have. When the rut fades and the mountains grow quiet, October becomes a thinking man's month. The bulls are there, just not where noise or movement will find them. They're in the folds, the shadows, the hidden benches that reward patience and punish haste. Glassing those transition zones is where the real hunters separate from hikers. The truth is, October isn't about chasing elk, it's about reading them. Every decision you make, where to glass, how long to sit, and when to move, comes down to understanding what the mountain is trying to tell you. The best hunters aren't just observers, they're interpreters. They know that each gust of wind, each sunlit slope, and each small flicker of motion adds up to a story. When you master that kind of stillness, you stop hunting by chance and you start hunting by knowledge. You see how the light rolls across the ridges and when elk will shift from one patch of shade to another. You understand how thermals breathe through a basin, when scent is safe and when it's time to move. You learn to spot the difference between a rock and a bull's shoulder simply by how the shadows change. And that's what I mean when I say you have to hunt with your eyes. It's not about moving more, it's about seeing more. It's about using patience as a weapon, time as a teacher, and elevation as your ally. The more you slow down, the more the mountain opens up. October rewards that mindset. The hunters who think they can grind their way into success are going to burn a lot of miles and oftentimes find nothing but empty drainages or bumped elk. The ones who slow down, glass with purpose, and trust the process. They're the ones who catch the elk movement, right? The slow transition from feed to bed or bed to feed. So as you step into your next October hunt, remember this: you don't have to outwork the mountain, you just have to outweight it. Find the vantage that gives you control. Read the country like a map. Match your rhythm to the thermals and light, and most of all, stay behind your glass until the truth reveals itself. Because when you finally learn to still hunt with your eyes, you're going to start seeing elk where everybody else swears there aren't any. If you're serious about taking this kind of knowledge deeper, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than just a membership. It's a way to sharpen your edge with exclusive tools, strategies, and a tribe of hunters who refuse to quit. Inside, you're going to get 20% off site-wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, a member-only t-shirt shipped to your door every month, not available anywhere else, full access to the digital content vault of guides, checklists, fitness programming, backcountry strategies, and mindset training, a private Facebook group with direct access to me, and a community of driven hunters who live relentless. Direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or just sharpening your edge. And automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. This is built for the guys who train for the hunt, push themselves in the off season, and want to be part of a tribe that makes them better. If you're ready for that kind of inner circle, then Team Backbone is waiting for you at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.